Hey everybody, QuestWise here, and in this video, we're going to talk about world building QuestWise style. I've had several people reach out to me and ask me how I approach world building when it comes to role-playing games, and I thought I'd start a new series in which I would talk about how I approach that aspect when I'm trying to create a world of my own. For whatever role-playing game it is. Everything I'm going to try to do here is going to be pretty system agnostic, because that's how I approach role playing. For me, role playing is a very narrative thing, and the rules are simply there to fit the specific game that I'm trying to play. But overall, when I approach world building, I do it sort of outside the rules of whatever game I'm planning to set it in. So, for instance, if I plan on starting a 5th edition campaign, but I want a unique campaign world, I will start to build that aspect of the world before I actually sit down with the rules and then try to implement the rules into that, or my world into that rule system. Um, Same thing, and it really depends on what kind of world I want to build. If I want something high fantasy, if I want, and we're going to, in this series, we're going to be talking about world building in a specifically fantasy type setting. Fantasy is my jam. That's my favorite genre. So I figured I would talk about world building when I world build for fantasy role playing games. So, like when I want to sit down and I want to do a kind of high fantasy, um, no holds barred kind of thing, I will probably pick D&D 5th edition. If I want something a little bit more traditional, a little bit more old school, I'll probably go with an older edition of D&D, or I'll pick some other sort of fantasy role-playing game that's a little less sort of epic in scope. If I want something a little bit more historically based fantasy type of thing, I'll go with Castles and Crusades. That's my preferred game setting for things that are a little bit more historically based. But I'm also going to talk a little bit about some products that I found extremely helpful when it comes to world building. The first of those is the Kobold Guide to World Building by Kobold Press. I'll put a link to all the ones that I mentioned down in the notes area down below so that you can check them out as well too. But the Kobold Press to World Building by Kobold Press, or Kobold Guide to World Building by Kobold Press, a fantastic resource for world building, and gives you a lot of great information and steps and inspiration for things when building worlds of your very own. The other one that I find extremely impressive, and I was introduced to this a year ago, 2 years ago at GaryCon, whenever the last GaryCon was that we could go to physically, the Storytellers Dictionary by Troll Games. This is just what it sounds like. It is a dictionary of defined terms within the storytelling aspect. Names, how names work, where they derive from, places, things. It is an essential, I believe, an essential resource to have if you're a writer, if you're a novelist, short story writer, game designer, any type of world building that you're going to be doing. I think the Storyteller's Dictionary by Troll Games is essential. Another one that I've had for years, and this one has really helped me in my sort of writing fiction as well as game design. And this one is specifically aimed at people writing fantasy and science fiction itself, short stories, novels, and such. Is the Guide to Writing Fantasy and Science Fiction by Philip Athens, with a foreword by R.A. Salvatore of Dritz Duerden fame, right? Of Forgotten Realms fame. Some of this, talking about creating characters and stuff, probably won't be a lot of interest or at least need for a game master, a dungeon master, a world designer, world builder, because your characters will be doing, and your players will be doing that. They'll be creating the characters for your world. But there are some amazing sections in here on world building itself, and how to describe those things. Filling, for instance, chapter 18, fill your world with people. There's some just amazing concepts in here that will fit with anything that you're trying to do, uh, be it world building for role playing games at the tabletop or writing your own fiction for those worlds as well too. Today we're going to start at the beginning. The way that I approach world building is a little unconventional. It's a little bit different than some of the stuff you'll read online. Most people will say to start small and work your way out, which I completely agree with. But for me, whenever I'm creating a new and unique world, I always start a little bit differently. I start with a grand picture of the cosmos, and then I narrow it down and I start again at a very small point and then build my way out of that. And I'll explain to you what I mean by that. I've always been extremely influenced by Tolkien's writings and the way that he constructed his cosmos, his creation. The Silmarillion is one of those books that has fascinated me for years. And it's one of those books that, to some degree, I can say that I don't truly fully understand, but I love trying to understand it. His creation mythos in the Silmarillion is by far one of the most beautiful things I think I have ever read as a world builder and as a writer and as a game designer. It is evocative and beautiful and creative, and it is one of those things that's always really inspired me. So whenever I approach world building, I always start with what is the creation mythos of my world that I want to create. And I always start there. I've always been fascinated by mythology and folklore, and so I've looked at things like, one of my favorite books when I was a younger kid was Bulfinch's Mythology, looking at the mythologies of different cultures and figuring out how it is that they believe that time and space and life began. And that's how I like to approach world building. I like to start there. How did life begin? Was it an evolutionary process? Was it a pantheon of gods that created life, that created the world itself? Was it one God who created immortal beings that then created life and creation? Was it a Big Bang type of an idea? Those are all things I sit down to consider when I'm building my own world and I'm trying to figure out what it is, the kind of story that I want to tell, the myth that I want to build in this specific setting. This is a specific idea that I have. And it's different for every time. And I love looking at different mythologies, Norse mythology, and Greek mythologies, and Native American mythologies, and in Chinese mythologies, Asian mythologies, and figuring out exactly what is unique, how I can use those as inspiration and come up with my own unique way of creating a mythology for the world. When I'm done with that, when I've figured out the sort of details of how life and creation began, I then zoom down to a very small point, a city, a country, a kingdom, and began to build my way out from that. Because I have a background now of how this universe, this world, this cosmos was created. What then becomes the important aspects of that city, that country, that kingdom? Were there multiple gods involved in the creation of this world? And if so, do the people still venerate those gods? Do those gods still exist? Have they left? Have they abandoned this place? Have they all been killed? Have they died? Another one that I've been very fascinated by recently, mythology-wise, is a comic by DC Black Label called The Last God. You may have seen my review and flip through of there's a guidebook that they came out with that's sort of a campaign setting for 5th edition of that world. And I've been really, really fascinated by the creation mythos in that the gods um, creating the things that they had done, and then, but the idea of that gods could eventually die, that they could grow old and die and outlive their usefulness. Kind of, it's hard to describe it. You have to check it out. Please go if you get a chance. Check it out. It's called, I'll put a link down below as to where you can see it. DC Black Label. It's called The Last God. And the aspect of this God in the void who has survived them all, and wreaks havoc because he's been locked away in the void by humanity, and seeks to find a way out. And I'll leave that to your reading to find out whether or not he does. But that's been one that's really impressed upon me lately. That's really inspired me to look again at world building. So this part one, I begin at the beginning. I start at the mythos and I create the world, and I create the gods and the aspects of how these worlds were created. And in order to do that, I need to look at sources like Greek mythology and Norse mythology and Chinese mythology, and I'd love to look at some of the more rare ones, different Native American mythologies of creation, Hindu aspects of creation and mythology, lesser known Mongolian. There's a billion different peoples out there who have different beliefs in how the universe was created, and had scribbled those down, sometimes in archaic terms. But I love looking at those aspects, and so I start with building the mythology, the cosmos of the world itself, and then zoom back down in. Next time we're going to talk about some aspects that come from this book, and creating kingdoms, and creating starting small. Basically, we're going to start with a city and work our way out. And we're going to talk about the people in the city and the things in those cities that you're going to incorporate, and how to make those things feel like they are alive. Until next time, I'm QuestWise. Game on and stay safe, my friends.